Okay, let's start. Just one more second. Okay, so let me just share the screen. Okay, so you should be able to see my full screen now. I've got a couple of documents open. We're going to be looking at doing a discussion, a detailed discussion on the assignment brief, for the management of human resources. This is a particular unit that we've just completed. So what I also want to do is be thorough on, how you would go about actually doing the assignment. So there's a sampler which will also be shared. And what I've done is I've converted the assignment brief into a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go through each task of it in terms of how it needs to be addressed. So if you have any questions at any given point in time, feel free to ask me through the chat route. You can stop me when I'm talking and, seek a clarification so that you're able to essentially, look at providing an assignment which should help you complete and achieve this unit in one go. Now, this particular unit, we covered 4 learning outcomes. So these 4 learning outcomes have been converted into 3 tasks in the assignment. The task 1 of the assignment primarily gives us a bit of a scenario that you are employed as an intern in a large multinational hospitality company, and as an intern, you are expending time in each of the business key operational areas of HR. And you're working within the HR department, and your mentor is your HR manager who has been with the company, assuming, for a couple of years. Now, the first task is to demonstrate sufficient knowledge that you are able to work within the HR department, and your mentor requires you to produce an essay which covers these following 3 points. So basically talking about the evolution and purpose of HR, looking at the objectives of HR and key operational areas of HR. These conform to these assessment criteria: learning outcome 1, 1.1, 2, and 3, and learning outcome 2, only 2.1. Now we are looking at producing a Word document, and in this case, you're looking at approximately writing about 1,000 words, plus minus 10%, and that would help meet that objective. Task 2 is essentially looking at addressing learning outcome 2, 3, and 4. It'll cover these assessment criteria, and here further on, you are asked by your mentor to review the functions of HR department and what are the factors which are impacting the department. So internal factors, external factors. And then you're required to produce a report which covers these bullet points, which are conforming to these assessment criteria. These include key strategic functions, the relationship between human resources and business department and strategy, internal, external factors, how the factors impact the business operations and the HR operations, and then looking at ways to measure effectiveness of how HR department works in tandem with the overall business strategy of the organization. Here, you're required to create about 1,500 words essay, and that would be, again, excluding diagram, appendices, and references. Part 3 of the assignment brief talks about creating a presentation. So now that you've completed your 2 tasks, your mentor requires you to use the knowledge gained from your time working in human resources department to justify recommendations on how the business could improve the effectiveness of human resources function within the company. Your mentor has asked you to arrange a presentation to the board of directors in the next monthly meeting, and you're required to prepare a presentation which could suggest ways of how the business could actually improve the effectiveness of the HR function within the organization. So here you're looking at producing about approximately a 10-minute presentation, which is like 10 to 12 slides. And then these slides are also provided with some 500 words in terms of speaker notes. And this presentation would then be addressing assessment criteria 4.2, which is in the learning outcome 4. Now, in order to discuss this, what I would do is basically just switch you over to a presentation, because what I've done with the assignment is converted that into a presentation, and that presentation essentially, covers all the bits that are mentioned in the assignment brief. So first of all, as we always start, you would need to fill up a cover sheet, and that cover sheet essentially, would be required to say, this is your declaration of originality. It says and provides basic details about your registration number, the unit, the word count, and then you obviously sign it. This is something that you can download from Moodle. As I've discussed in the previous discussions, what you would normally do is, before you start the assignment off, I would suggest that you read the assignment brief at least 2 times. Identify the key command verbs which are there in the assignment brief, and then go about actually, writing the assignment. And because we clearly know that there are 3 tasks and they require a certain amount of word limit, it is important for us to focus on the detail, which is the command verb, and the task being asked to produce in terms of evidence. And these are some indicative word counts that you would be looking at, adhering to, so that your work is conforming the minimum word limit required in the assignment. As always, I would suggest that when you do your assignment, please include theory, underpin the theory by showing application of it, and then also include examples, which could be either from your own work experience, or maybe choose an organization that you can research, and that should allow you to use that organization as an example throughout the assignment while you're doing all the tasks. So tasks 1 and 2 in this case are 1,000 and 1,500 words, and task 3 is basically a PowerPoint presentation with approximately presentation for, let me write, 10 minutes, and it should have speaker notes, which are approximately 500 words. So give or take, as you can see, this is about a 3,000 word assignment that you're looking at doing. And my suggestion here would be to ensure that you are adhering to the word limit. So it should be minimum 3,000. It should not be less than that. But, anything in that region would essentially be looking at meeting a pass criteria. Now, when you do the assignment, and I will show this to you, it's important and essential for you to properly format and structure your document. Make sure that you follow some of these guidelines which I've given on the PowerPoint slide. Start with an introduction, do a conclusion, look at font size of 12, line spacing of 1.5, clearly write out the tasks first before you start attempting the assignment, which allows the assessor, in this case me, the tutor, to basically quickly mark your assignment and give you feedback in terms of what you've done, which meets the criteria, what you haven't done, and it allows you to turn that around quite quickly. Now, the scenario we've gone through, and then these are the tasks which I have put focus on and individual slides, and these would also be available for you to go through. Now, what we want to be able to do is, when you do submit your assignment, the assignment submission date is 30th of October, approximately 2 weeks. You're going to submit your work to Learner Work at UK Versity. And if you're taking work from a Moodle or some of the journals, articles that have been included for the purposes of reference, please ensure that you are referencing them. If you're using material from within the UK Versity slides, obviously do reference them accordingly so that, it is showing that you are giving credit to where the work has actually been taken from. Now, this is the journal bit on the assignment discussion. So I will come to now, let's look at actually how the assignment has to be done. And this is a sample assignment that I would be sharing. So some of the things that I've mentioned in the PowerPoint slide I've actually included, as you would see in the header. I put my name in. You should also put your registration number. So I would say, for example, put my registration number as, just as an example. You obviously label the unit on the top. One of the things which I haven't done, which should be done, is to basically include a cover page or a cover, page on the unit, and that would primarily be related to, the declaration of originality, which I spoke about in terms of the assignment cover. And I would suggest that you copy and paste that just in the first page itself. So let me insert and put that in here, and then move this to the second page. So here, what I would do is essentially write my name, write my registration number, the center, the course that I'm doing, Diploma in Tourism and Hospitality Management, the code of the unit, which is obviously available on the assignment brief. So that's the code for the unit. And then I also mentioned the name of the unit in terms of, what the name of the unit is. Now, what I also want to do is obviously put my signatures here. Either you can type it out, and then the date, which is say 19th today, which I put in here, and then the word count. So in the case of word count of the assignment right now is 2338, which is without the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm doing my summation. So this basically completes, let's say the front cover sheet of the assignment and makes it my own document. Now, in terms of the assignment that we have to do, what we do is basically what I've done is I've copied and pasted this from the assignment brief, just to ensure that I'm addressing all the tasks, and I'm also, giving the scenario, a thorough read, so that the tasks that I do are then, following what the, tasks or the assessment criteria is given are. Now, as I mentioned, you're employed as an intern, so I would basically start off with a bit of an introduction. And the introduction basically says that I'm working for a leading multinational hospitality company. I can be very specific here, choose a particular company, destination travels, or say, for example, just the name of the travel, like Bari Travels, or for example, Bali Travels, and you can contextualize it further. Now, what I've done is I've done this particular introduction primarily, for the tasks that I'm going to do. So here there are 3 bits which I'm looking at. One is the evolution of HR, objectives of HR, and key operations of HR. So what I've done is I've done the introduction to basically explain that as an intern working for a travel and tourism company, or say Bali Tours and Travel, I'm going to be looking at, completing task 1 by covering 3 parts of the assignment, 3 parts of the task, 1 in the assignment, and that would be looking at functions and evolutions of HR, purpose of HR, and obviously key operational objectives of HR department. And then I've started off with the evolution of HRM, I've looked at a picture, or in my assignment, I normally suggest all learners to use plenty of pictures, tables, and diagrams, because it allows you to build arguments. It allows you to put the data across, and then you can start explaining. So what I've done is I've looked at an image that I found, which is showing the evolution of HRM over the years. And because it is related to this particular task, what I've done is I have put that across, and then I've gone into the purpose of HR. And then later on, the third part, which is basically looking at the objectives of HR. So objectives of HRM tend to be the 7 functions that we've talked about, things like recruitment, selection, staffing, unions, looking at talent acquisition, looking at compliance and regulation. And you could cover any of the 4 or 5 functions which basically help you talk about the objectives of HRM. I've only done 3 in the sample assignment, but I would suggest, in order to meet the word limit, you would need to look at essentially covering pretty much all the functions of HRM, which are generally the 7 functions that we talk about. And in order to do the assignment and ensure that you're following through on all the functions and every bit is covered, my suggestion would be to essentially look at putting in a picture which basically covers all these functions, and that would essentially ensure that you are not forgetting any sort of key function which is done by the HR department within the organization. So for example, I might put in an image like this here, and I would reference this particular image if I'm taking it from a particular source, and that would allow me to use that image and also give credit to where this image has been taken from. So this is objectives of HRM, and I've taken it from source. I'll write, which is Open HRMS, and then I will towards the bibliography, what I would do is basically put the reference in of which particular place or site that I've taken it from. So if I scroll down, what I'm going to do is put a reference here for the website, and I'll say assessed on, and today's date, which is 19/10/2023, and that basically completes the purposes of essentially referencing this particular picture. Similarly, I should have done this for evolution of HRM, and this is showing evolution of HRM. And here, what I've taken is the source is HRM website. And what I would need to do essentially is, when I look at putting the reference down, that would also be required, because what I would do is essentially give credit to the website from which this has been taken. And what I would do is essentially go into the references again, and then put that here, and again put the timestamp, which is when I have accessed this particular bit of information. So this actually shows that you're also researching, you're also mixing the referencing in terms of you're using books, articles, journals, and website, and that shows the amount of research that you're doing also when writing the assignment. Now, essentially, when you look at the objective of HRM, you would need to cover all this: workforce management, recruitment, selection, or the way you would want to word it across. Staffing is recruitment and selection, training and development, payroll management, employee satisfaction, which is employee appraisals, job descriptions, diversity and inclusion, and obviously compliance. Now, these are broader functions that you would need to cover in this particular task. And as long as you have covered these functions, they would be meeting your criteria of actually doing this part of the task. The third part of the task talks about the key operational functions of HRM. So what you're doing is you're going into detailing of explaining these operational functions. And sometimes when we talk about the operational functions, again, what I would suggest is it is important and it is going to be useful if you bring across maybe an image so that you clearly know that what are the operational functions that you're going to be covering in terms of doing the HR. So here I've looked at again a picture that I've taken from Google by doing a bit of a search, and this would allow me to reference the image, and it also tells me a bit of let's say a bit of say, for example, a confirmation which basically tells me that, I wouldn't be looking at forgetting any key functions that I need to discuss when it comes to, essentially completing this particular task. So it is going to be quite useful if we cover, these key functions, and obviously also look at mentioning, the website from which, this has been taken. So I would suggest that if I put this across, this would be, key operational functions of HRM, and the source that I've taken it from is Management Guru, and then I would basically, put this across again as a part of the reference, and that would be, giving credit to from where I've taken this particular work. So this part of referencing should actually include, if you ask me, it says operative functions of HRM. And that is what would be, the complete aspect of, how the reference need to be put. So evolution of HRM, comma, and this is where I put, key objectives of HRM function. So as you would see, this would then complete the proper referencing, which is required to be completed for this particular task. Now, what I would do is obviously go about completing these by writing about it in terms of what is recruitment and selection and how it is done for the company, because you are working as an intern, let's not forget. And what you have to do is relate it to the scenario which has been given in the assignment brief, and that would allow you to cover all these functions, which would also allow you to meet the word limit of 1,000 words, which is required for this particular task. And then towards the end, what you would also do is draw up a conclusion, and that conclusion would essentially summarize what is your understanding in terms of completing these tasks, and then finally do referencing at the end, and that would basically be looking at completing this task one in I would say great amount of detail. So this is how I would suggest that you need to go about essentially writing the tasks in the assignment, which is primarily for task one, and there are 3 assessment criteria. As long as you're able to do this in paragraphs, don't use bullet points, that would allow you to achieve this particular criteria. Now, one of the things which I would ask all learners to do is to also look at doing a word count. Now, this is task one. And if I look at just this part without referencing, without the task itself, I then need to go about and check what is the word count. So the word count as of now is only showing 581 words, right? So that means I need to write another 500 words. And that is why I told you a reason is that if you bring an image across, you would know that these are the bits that you need to cover. So like in the evolution of HRM, I've just written only a summary, but you could define and say details about how the evolution of HR has happened in the early 18th century, then early 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, and the 20th century, and then beyond. And that across 4 paragraphs, if you write how it has evolved from being a welfare officer to a labor manager to a personal management officer or a role to a human resources management role, and then finally strategic HRM would allow you to achieve that word limit as well. So maybe adding 4 paragraphs, to explain what has been suggested here would be good. Similarly, in objectives of human resource management, I have only covered 3 functions: staffing, performance management, and legal compliance. But if you go across and cover all the functions, which is the reason why I suggest that you put an image in, this will allow you to meet the word count. And then when we go to the key operational functions, you're again looking at, covering the key operational functions of HR, and that would allow you to hit the word limit simply because you know that these are the functions that you're going to cover. So if you have to include another 500 words, what I would suggest is that at some stage, what you would need to do primarily is look at elaborating on all the functions and write about 20 to 30 words for each of them related to the assignment scenario, and that should allow you to meet this particular task. Is that okay? Are any questions on task one? Any questions at your end? Okay, so no questions, right? Okay, now let's go to task 2. Now, task 2 is looking at building on what you've essentially already done. But because task 2 is having, 3 different assessment criteria, which is LO2, LO3, and LO4, and is looking at a couple of, assessment criteria. Here again, the word limit has been mentioned is 1500. So what you have to do is again start off with the key strategic functions of the HR department. Again, some part of this might feel a bit repetitive, but when we look at the key operative functions of HR, they tend to be strategic in the sense that when you do planning for recruitment and selection, or when you do HR planning and you look at how it impacts the organization in the long term, this is where what you're going to be looking at doing is talking about these functions in a bit more detail. Because the first part, let's not forget, it talks about key strategic functions. So here, from a point of view of strategic nature of what the HR functions are, what we need to be able to do essentially is talk about the strategic functions, although they remain the same, but the content of it would need to, include theory, or maybe need to also include, let's say, key frameworks, and that would be looking at providing a good coverage on some of the key aspects of what you would be required to do. So if I look at the key functions, or key strategic functions of HR, what I'm going to be looking at is basically putting across, a couple of things. Again, making use of an image. The reason I would put it this way is that making use of the image would essentially allow me to make sure that I'm covering the task in a great amount of detail. Although I know the functions and I've covered that in task 1, but what I would need to do is put in an image which will allow me to, say, for example, use this and then talk about and build the arguments. So here is where I would say the key functions, key strategic functions of HR would be, again, I would put key strategic functions of HRM, source AIHR, and towards the end, I am going to obviously include a link, and that would essentially cover, me giving credit to from where I've taken, this work from. Assessed on 19/10/2023, and then this talks about the key strategic functions of HRM. So here again, because there's a word limit of 1500 words, I'm going to suggest that you elaborate on all these functions. Also, give an example, and that would allow you to complete this task. Now, one of the things that you have to do in the second bullet point is look at relationship between the HR strategy and the business strategy of the company. So here again, I would suggest that when we talk about the business strategy and also the HR strategy, you would need to use and talk about what are the various bits that need to be done when HR tries to align to the business strategy of the organization. So if I look at an example here in terms of business strategy and HR strategy, what we want to look at talking about in general is the relationship of how business objectives, which are set by the management, are then executed by HR, and that would be talking about long-term planning of, say, for example, planning and recruitment, looking at the aspect of performance evaluation, looking at the aspect of training and development, and how that would increase productivity, efficiency within the organization. So here is where we would need to look at one particular HR strategic model. And the reason I put this across is that when we talk about the relationship between business strategy and HR strategy, what we need to be able to do is basically use the Harvard model, or in this case, the one particular model which basically highlights, the example of how HR practices are related, and they follow the business practice as essentially given in the objectives or goals and objectives of the organization on an annual planning basis. So my session here would be to look at covering this by usage of this particular HRM model. The HRM model that we've discussed, in the learning outcome 2 of our discussion of this particular unit highlight some of the models like the Ulrich model, the Harvard model. We've looked at, the Howard-Seth model, and these models essentially are related to creating a link between the HR department and the business objectives of the organization. So here, this particular model that I've put forward, is a model that essentially looks at, talking about the connection or relationship between how the HR practices can inform in the performance, in bettering the performance of the organization and thereby achieving the goals of the organization. And this particular model, is, I would put it this way, the reason I put this across is basically showing, the image is actually showing the relationship between the two. And then what I would do is basically, put the source on again. And this is from Business Ethics and Leadership volume. It's from a journal that I've taken, volume 2, issue 2, and it was published in 2018. So you could say Business Ethics and Leadership volume, but this part of it essentially would be the detail which will come into the referencing towards the end. And in terms that would allow you to, obviously refer it properly. Now, this particular model highlights what are the connections between, the business and performance and the HR objective side of things. There is also another, picture or model that I can use, which is primarily talking about the outcomes and how they are related. So the key part that I'm trying to mention here is that when you look at essentially discussing this particular task, which is relationship between HR department and business strategy, what you would be looking at covering is talking about the ways of how HR strategies are helpful to an organization in achieving the overall annual objectives, which are set, by the management. And this would show that if HR is able to create a conducive environment, an environment wherein you are rewarding the employees for the right things they're doing for achieving the objectives, then thereby this will reduce things like, absenteeism, turnover. The people working within that role, they would be more satisfied in their job and they'll be more committed. And thereby they would be, committed to achieving the goals and objectives of the organization. And that is what the strategic nature of HRM is, that as an HR manager, what I need to do is understand what are the management objectives and then translate those management objectives into job descriptions, into key parts of the roles and responsibility that an individual needs to perform so that the organization is able to achieve its goals and objective. And this would then, I would suggest this particular task would need to be written in about 200 to 300 words in order for you to be able to highlight what is the relationship between business and HR strategy. Now, you could also do a table if that is something, if that is something that you, feel that is going to be more beneficial to put this across as an answer. I would suggest that you could do a table as well. And that table, if you create, would essentially, have things related to, say, for example, what is the business strategy of the company, what is and how that business strategy is translated into HR objectives. And then these HR objectives then can be, put into smaller activities, and they would then be highlighted with a bit of an example. And that would essentially mean that you are able to cover this primarily, in great amount of detail. So if I have to put a table here, just as an example, to highlight this particular point, what I would suggest to you to do is do a table essentially, which would, explain this in a bit of more detail. And that could be something like this. So if I put this across for you, just as an example, then what I would do is basically look at, a table and with a paragraph explain, why and how would I think these two are essentially related. And that would also help me, essentially cover this particular, task. So this is an important part of your assignment simply because this is the bit where it talks about you referring to the key HR models. And I think if you do something like this as a table by explaining business strategy relating it to HR objectives, and then what could be the actions and an example, that would perfectly gel with, essentially what is required for this particular task. Now, the next one talks about internal and external factors, in terms of how they affect the organization and the HR function. So here, I would suggest, although we have covered this in a bit of detail, again, I would suggest that, highlighting this with particularly an image by taking only one function, for example, just the recruitment process of how that would be affected by external and internal factors, would be useful or would be beneficial. Sometimes taking an example or an exact example essentially is quite useful because it helps you to be focused in terms of how you're going to answer a particular question or a particular task which has been given. So here again, if I have to put, say, for example, an image across, what I would do is primarily put something in which basically talks about a particular function and talks about in detail how these factors could affect, just the recruitment part. I don't need to take a lot of factors here. So sometimes, and in organizations, they have budgets. And if we need to recruit people, then the HR is not only tasked with finding candidates without using sometimes the advertising or agencies or recruitment agencies. And the idea is to minimize the cost of recruitment. So HR would then use their own relationships, existing employee relationships, or go back to employees to ask for referrals. And that is what you would look at covering, how these factors could affect the HR function just for one particular aspect of it, which is the recruitment process. And that would help you cover this particular task. Now, there is also something which is the last bullet point, if you see in the task which is given here on the top, is way to measure the effectiveness of HR functions and its department. So here, what you would need to essentially look at doing would be to look at covering tasks related to, how would HR control, the workings within the organization. So here, again, we could look at, certain points like HR is normally tasked with reducing the employment rates. That means people leaving the organization. They would look at ensuring that satisfaction is there in terms of people working on their job roles, and then time to hire, cost to hire, or time to hire, cost to fire would have to be looked at calculating performance reviews and obviously relating this to the financial matrix of the organization. Now here, you could do a couple of things. So in terms of talking about, the primary measures which HR looks at, you could do a table. You could also talk about the, let's say, different, operative functions of HR and how you would basically look at that the HR, is, let's say, having a meaningful impact in the organization. Again, I would suggest that you look at using an image, and this image, or maybe a suitable image that you would draw, or a table that you would draw, essentially allow you to cover some of the points. So reduce turnover, that means less number of employees leaving the organization, which means they're happy within their job roles. Increased engagement would mean people own up their jobs, they're happy to take more responsibility. And then you are looking at performance reviews and other aspects of it, which would effectively measure how the HR department is performing in the organization. So if I'm the director of the company, one of the things that I would want to look at is how do I evaluate whether the HR is doing its own role. So management would, at the end of the year, look at measuring certain things like the expenses, job satisfaction surveys, or some sort of metrics which would essentially allow the human resources department to say that, I have had no people leaving the organization this year, or people generally, when we have surveyed, found that 90% of the staff is happy within their roles and the functions that they've got. And then they are generally happy with the aspect of, taking on additional responsibility. And if there are cordial relations within the HR side of things between different employees, that would also show that, the HR side of things is actually doing, their job well. Now, here, there is a particular model that can also be put into, practice, which sometimes is referred to, the Kilpatrick's model, because if you want to go into detail, for example, what will happen is that at some stage, if you want to present one aspect that, okay, training and development is one of the functions which is performed quite well within the organization, then at some stage, if training has led to increased efficiency and productivity within the organization, thereby most employees are achieving their targets and their results, then HR can use the Kilpatrick's 4-level training evaluation model to say the training that we have done or have been doing over the year has resulted in employees being more productive and more efficient, thereby being able to perform better in their job roles. And the training has been effective in helping the employees gain more skills, or at least sharpening their skills. And thereby the result of this has been seen in increased turnover or sales or profitability of the organization. So depending on which point you take or which particular example you take, you would need to put that into a bit of perspective. And because this particular task talks about, ways to measure effectiveness, and effectiveness here would mean that you need to give a bit of an argument to, when I say argument, I mean by that is you need to give a bit of a theoretical background. And with that background, with the theoretical background, you have to give an example. And that example would essentially help you cover that particular task well. And that would allow then you to achieve task 2. Towards the end, do a conclusion, make sure that you're referencing the work, and that shows the amount of research that you're doing, and that would set you into achieving the task 2 nicely. Is that okay? Any questions on this? Okay, with this, we'll go into the third part of the assignment. And for this, what I'm going to do is obviously shift you over to a PowerPoint presentation, because task 3 talks about you have successfully completed task 1 and 2. Now your mentor requires you to make a presentation of what recommendations you're going to give to improve, the human resources function within the organization. And you're required to produce a presentation. So what I've done here is I've essentially prepared the presentation on a PowerPoint slides, but I have put the broad aspects of that presentation within my Word assignment. So here in the Word assignment, what I've done essentially is talked about what slides I'm going to, produce, and what are the key aspects of those slides that I'm going to be producing. So slide 1 is talking about the objective of the presentation. It is only looking at assessment criteria 4.2 as per the assignment brief. So I do an introduction slide, then I do an overview, and I talk about the current state of HRM within the organization, talk about some of the theoretical frameworks like the Harvard model, and how it helps me in aligning the business strategy with the organizational strategy. Then I'm making recommendations of where the HR needs to improve. We need to improve in talent acquisition, improve in delivery of the training programs, look at improving performance management and how it is measured using 360 feedback, and also employment well-being. That means balance between work-life or personal work-life balance has to be promoted within the organization. And these are suggested improvements that you're making to the board of directors. What I would do then is basically detail them out, on the slide with some speaker notes. And I've obviously put some references here, which I've looked at for the purposes of, obviously researching and compiling my work as far as PowerPoint presentation is concerned. So now if I show you how the PowerPoint presentation has been made, let me switch you over. So what I've done is for the PowerPoint presentation, I have essentially made, about 12 slides. 1 or 2 slides are obviously just, slides which are basically placeholder slides like the introduction, the task and things like that. And what I have then done is basically made sure that I have put my name on, and I put the task on in terms of what the presentation is asking me, or what the task essentially is asking me to do, which is to look at making a presentation. And that is what I have put across clearly for the purposes of ensuring that as a heading, I put that across so that it is clear that this is what is required to be done. The objective is basically the cut and paste of what is required to be done. And in this case, what I've done is to discuss actionable strategies that enhance the effectiveness of HRM function within the organization. So here you can name a fictitious organization that you have taken in the task 1 and 2s. So I would say Bali Tours and Travel, and that is where it gives a context to what you're preparing as far as presentation is concerned. Now, I've drawn up an agenda, so I'm going to talk about this in 5 different major points: current state, theoretical frameworks, suggested improvements, and how would we measure those improvements towards the end, and then what is the conclusion. So current state of HRM, I've looked at for the organization. The strengths are we are able to acquire talent and have employee engagement programs. The improvement areas tend to be we don't have any strong training programs, and how do we measure performance of employees is weak. And then the frameworks that I put very briefly, the 212 frameworks that I'm going to be using. Now, what you would also see is under the slides, I've actually put some speaker notes, and these speaker notes are put primarily to explain what I would be speaking in this slide. So here, if in the slides, if I look at it, it says we'll consider 2 theoretical frameworks. Strategic HRM helps us align HRM with business strategy. The high performance work system framework focuses on practices that are not only to enhance performance, but also employee well-being. And they are essentially important for consideration within the hospitality industry, which often demands irregular work hours. So this is the point that I've explained and why the frameworks have been used. I've explained them in each of the slides under the speaker notes. Even for the agenda slide, I've said my presentation is structured to provide an overview of the current HRM practices. This will be followed by theoretical frameworks, followed by a support on our analysis. And then I will delve into suggested improvements and metrics on how we could gauge the effectiveness of the suggestions and implementation of the suggestions done. So for each slide, I have put in some words as if I'm going to be presenting this, and what I'm going to be presenting, the verbatim or the speaker notes have been put underneath the slides. You can put them onto the Word document as well, not a problem. But essentially, because the requirement is here to produce a PowerPoint presentation, you would need to produce at least 10 to 12 slides, which basically discuss this in a bit more detail. So this is how you would go about, completing task 3. And then don't forget that even in a PowerPoint presentation, you need to put references, and these references that you put would essentially show what is the research that you have done in order to, compile this presentation. So this will bring us to the end of this particular assignment. And we have ensured by, obviously following the assignment brief, the command verbs, to ensure that the tasks are done as per the requirements of the assignment brief. They are meeting the word criteria. I'm referencing the work, and that is allowing me to achieve the assignment in the first instance itself. Any questions on today's session? So have you found this useful? The session to be useful? Okay, what I'm going to do is then, upload these to the, relevant section of, the presentation and the section in, the Moodle, and you can access them from there. And that will allow us to essentially, complete this particular unit. Is that okay? Any questions, any points that you want to discuss? Okay, so that's perfect. If you think of any, do let me know. And what I will do is, send across details on the email, but I'll update the Moodle in a couple of minutes after the session, and you should be able to access most of it from there. So If you then make a submission for this particular assignment in the coming days, I will get it marked, and obviously, you will get the feedback on it, and that would allow you to move to the next unit. So thank you so much for attending today, and I will be in touch with you with regards. I think I'll ask Jill to be in touch with you with regards to the next schedule. If there are any units which are left for delivery, then we'll cover those in the next week, and the schedule should go out to you by tomorrow.